My name is Kathy Redmond, and I have been working with the Max Foundation on the development of this toolkit. And my role here today is to moderate the discussion during the presentation, but also to go through the toolkit with you, picking up on different aspects of the toolkit and why we've included certain things and not others. And we will, Erin Lindsay and myself will present the toolkit together. We will present first of all the background to the toolkit. I will go through the toolkit, and then we will have a discussion around ways in which the toolkit could be used and what other opportunities there are to support implementation of the toolkit. In terms of ensuring that the discussion flows in as much as possible, it's always much more difficult to do one of these webinars as opposed to a face-to-face meeting. I'd like to encourage you to contribute to discussions, ask questions, and you can ask questions either using the chat facility or by raising your hand. You see on the screen there's a little hand, and if you click on that, that will show me that you'd like to make a point, or you'd like to ask a comment or make a comment. I really hope that this this webinar will be as interactive as possible. We have 1 hour for discussion, and I'm confident that we will get through things in that time frame. However, we may finish early if you don't have so many questions, and we'll wait to see. What I am confident about is we won't go over the 1 hour time frame. So I'd like to thank you for taking time to join us here today. The session is being recorded, and that means it will be available to others afterwards who are interested, who just couldn't be here because of course, time. It's not easy to hold a webinar for a global audience with so many time zones in the world. And thank you so much for making the effort to join. So if we start out, and let's introduce the MyPCR Advocacy Toolkit, and I'm going to give Erin Lindsay the floor. So maybe you can just give us some background into why the Max Foundation decided to do this.
Sure, thank you, Kathy. So starting out with a little bit of background about MyPCR, what the initiative is. So MyPCR actually started back in 2012 as a coalition of CML patient advocacy organizations. And it was a very collective grassroots movement that was aimed at providing a platform to raise awareness about the importance of access to PCR testing for people living with CML. Another primary aim is to encourage dialogue between about PCR between patients and physicians, as well as educating individuals and equipping them with the tools that they need for PCR testing. So through the MyPCR initiative, there are a number of different resources that are provided on mypcr.org, including grant opportunities around awareness and education, which we will talk about a little bit at the end of this presentation. But I would encourage you, if you have questions about the initiative, how it started, and what resources are available to advocates, to visit mypcr.org, and you can learn more there. So why did MyPCR push for an advocacy toolkit? As many of you probably already are aware, regular PCR monitoring is critical to ensure optimal health outcomes for people living with CML. Despite this, many people all over the world, both in high-income and low-income countries, struggle to have sufficient access to PCR testing. And so advocates around the world have expressed a need for a concise and clear resource that can kind of help them help guide their advocacy process around PCR. And so there's a lot of information online about how to advocate generally and advocate broadly There's also a lot of information on how to advocate for access to specific drugs or to specific types of diagnostics. But for PCR, there seemed to be a lack of concise resources around how to advocate. And so the goal was to not reinvent the wheel, but to devise a tool that could kind of bring together all of the information that's already available on the web, all of it already available to advocates, but to bring that information together into one concise tool. And so that's kind of a little bit of background on why the toolkit was developed. And I would also like to kind of reiterate that the toolkit is a work in process. And so this is the first iteration of the MyPCR toolkit. And we hope as we move forward in the next year, this year and next year, to continue to build upon this initial iteration of the toolkit. And so to talk a little bit about the development process and how we came to this first iteration of the toolkit, we started by securing sponsorship from Novartis, Ariad, BMS, Pfizer, and Cepheid. So these companies have been longtime supporters of the MyPCR initiative, and they were able to provide funding to help move this project forward. We also engaged Kathy Redmond, who was on the call with us today, and she's been guiding the process since spring of 2016, which has been wonderful, and she's been able to kind of provide that strategic input around how best to move forward with the content. And then we established a steering committee of 4 advocates because we realized that we needed to have a voice from an advocate voice from each region of the world where MyPCR focuses. So we had Andrian, who's a patient advocate from Indonesia, Param, who is a patient advocate from India with Friends of Max, and then Mercedes, who works with the Max Foundation but is also an advocate in Latam. She's based out of Argentina. And then Ferdinand, who is a patient advocate with Henzo Kenya in Kenya. And so we worked very closely with these 4 individuals. Each time we would develop a new draft of the toolkit, we would share that draft with the steering committee, who would provide their input and thoughts about the content, both the content in terms of the scientific content and the technical content, but also just kind of the phrasing and the verbiage, making sure that we were being clear and concise in how we were conveying the information. And then in May of 2016, we hosted a brainstorming dinner at CML Horizons. And this consisted of about 30 CML advocates who were already attending CML Horizons in Ljubljana. And the goal of that brainstorming dinner was really just to bring as many voices to the conversation as possible around what kind of content would be most useful for CML advocates to have in this toolkit. And so it was a great brainstorming session, lots of wonderful feedback and lots of wonderful content suggestions that we attempted to incorporate as much of as possible in this first iteration. However, there's always additional content that we couldn't fit into this one, but we hope to fit into future iterations. So moving forward, Kathy will talk a little bit about the content that we ended up adding to the toolkit. But part of the discussion that I think would be really great to have today would be to hear from all of you what kind of additional content would be useful and what you would like to see in future iterations of the toolkit. And if you're listening to the recorded version and you have feedback that you would like to send over, please feel free to send that to my email, which I'm providing at the end of the presentation. And so then finally, the last step in the process was that we recognized that we needed a medical communications company to actually put together the content itself into writing, and also to put together some infographics and make sure that the design of the toolkit was visually appealing and easy to follow. And so we engaged a company called Nucleus Global, and they've been wonderful to work with. And they produced the final layout, design, and most of the written content as well. So it was a very iterative process, co-creation process with the steering committee, with the advocates at CML Horizons, and then also with Nucleus Global, the communications agency. And so with that, Kathy, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about the content in the brainstorming session.
Thank you very much. As Erin Lindsay has said, we had this fantastic brainstorming session at CML Advocates at CML Horizons last year. And this was really important because so many toolkits and resources are developed without having input from the target audience who's supposed to use the resource. So as we had a lot of feedback, and what we tried to do was categorize the feedback into two key areas. One was, what kind of information did advocates need to have around CML and PCR? And that's important because there was some discussion at during the brainstorming meeting, perhaps a lack of clarity on who was the target audience. And the target audience are advocates who already would have a certain level of knowledge about CML. This is not for individual patients. So we categorized according to what information about PCR and CML would be useful, and also what information about advocacy would be useful. So under PCR, it is, what is PCR? What are the current international guidelines? What does it mean to do testing correctly? What are the advantages of testing? What are the economic arguments in favor of testing? Trying to build a picture of where labs are currently, where you can currently access testing according to international standards, and also regional country data on CML. And in terms of advocacy, it was very much around how to advocate effectively, how to make a case to decision makers, how to use social media, a lot of how-to stuff, as well as some examples of messaging around a PCR campaign. So what kind of messages would potentially resonate with those there is a need to influence. So we took these findings. There was a lot in there, a lot that we could potentially have put into the toolkit, and we recognized that it was not possible to put everything in. And this is, as we said earlier on, it may be in the future, and also as experience is built in doing a MyPCR campaign, that we add to the toolkit based on positive experiences. So can I have the next slide, please? Mm-hmm. Or have you given me the rights?
No, there you go.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So as I said, the toolkit is for CML advocates as opposed to the individual patients, and it's to help them advocate more effectively for advocate effectively for access to PCR testing. And then if we look at the actual toolkit itself, I know that you got a link last week to the toolkit, and some of you may have had an opportunity to look at it. But what I'd like to do now is just very, very briefly just go through the toolkit. So as you can see, it's really short and sweet, with only about 22 pages. And that's one of the reasons why we had to make strategic decisions to leave some content out that may well be important, and why it's important you give us feedback on the content that's there. But essentially, we have an introduction to the initiative itself and why we've developed the toolkit. Can I have the next? If we scroll down. Mm-hmm. And then we have a section, one section on PCR and one section on advocacy. The section on PCR is very, very top line introduction to PCR, and that's because we recognize there's a lot of information already out there on PCR, and also on the MyPCR website, and it didn't make sense to reinvent the wheel by including more information in the toolkit. However, what we have tried to do is ensure that the information that is in the toolkit is information that every advocate has to know about PCR testing to be able to make an effective case to a decision maker, regardless of who that decision maker could be. So there's information about basically what is the test, what are the international standards currently, international recommendations for PCR testing. How do you interpret the PCR results? And this was very important because also as the state-of-the-art of treatments of CML evolves and more patients are having the opportunity to stop therapy, it becomes really, really important that patients have access to proper PCR testing. So we felt it was important to communicate this in as clear a way as possible through the infographics that we've chosen. And we've also included information about different approaches to testing, recognizing that in different parts of the world there are different approaches to testing used. But the most important thing is that testing is done according to the information standard. We have scrolled through maybe a little bit too quickly because at the start we have a section with a glossary of terms, because we also recognize, particularly for advocates that are new to CML advocacy, that it's important we don't use jargon that may be difficult for people to understand. So we have this glossary of terms at the very start, which hopefully explains all of the terms that we are using in the toolkit. So Lindsay, if you could go back to where we were, that would be great. And also we've explained the abbreviations that are used, because people who are in advocacy for a long time often use these abbreviations without recognizing that sometimes they're not well understood. So that's section 1 on PCR testing. Section 2 is around advocacy. And again, we struggled a bit here because we recognize that people are in advocacy and they're advocating all the time, so they know quite a lot about advocacy. And we didn't want to send the message out that people are novices or that people don't know how to advocate. But we wanted to make sure, we wanted to have a framework that would help us provide some guidance on how to advocate on PCR testing, on access to PCR testing. So what we've done is we went and we found online a huge amount of how to advocate resources. And we took the very best from what we found online, and we used that as a framework to present an advocacy campaign on PCR testing. So we've said up front, we've had an introduction on what is advocacy and how to advocate effectively. And then on the next page, we've honed that down onto advocating on PCR testing. So if you could continue to scroll. So as a first step in PCR testing, it's important to understand the subject matter. If we could go back up again. Lindsay, yeah. So what we tried to do here is identify, through the work we have done and using the input from the steering committee, to try and understand what are the key challenges faced in terms of access to PCR testing. And we recognize that some of the challenges were patient-related, some physician-related, and some health system-related. And in order to understand the problem in a specific setting, a specific region or in a specific country, you needed to understand what is the problem in your country. And we felt it was important just to flag up some common challenges, but also encourage those who are planning their PCR campaign to really understand the situation in their own reality. And we also provided a case study to provide an example of how important it is to understand the subject matter when you are advocating. Can we go down to the next page?
Do you see that there? I think there's a bit of a delay.
So the next stage, of course, is to set clear goals, and the most important recommendation here is to have to be as clear as possible about what you're trying to achieve. And again, that will vary from setting to setting. And once you've identified what it is you want to achieve in terms of PCR campaign, it's then important to understand who you need to influence, which is the next stage. If we scroll down, please, to the next page, which is a stakeholder mapping exercise. And again, this is important because we recognize that most CML organizations have limited resources and have to make very smart decisions about how to make the best use of available resources. And doing a stakeholder mapping exercise is a very important way of prioritizing where you invest your limited resources. And we felt it was important to flag that up to people who are considering doing a campaign, again using a case study to illustrate the points we were trying to make. And then the next page. You'll recall that one of the big asks from the brainstorming session last year was for some help in developing messaging around the PCR campaign. And again, we tried to break that messaging down according to target audiences, recognizing that target audiences will differ according to the setting in which the campaign is taking place. And then the next page. And the last step, of course, of any advocacy campaign is to take action. And we have just flagged up again different ways of taking action. And that action is really culturally specific. So what may work in the United States may not work in Indonesia and vice versa. And that's because political systems are different, healthcare systems are different. So we could not be prescriptive in the approach that could be taken. We have focused on social media in the next page, but we didn't want to overlook the potential use of writing letters. Snail mail still has a role in advocacy, and that should not be overlooked. And that's particularly important in some of the settings in which a PCR campaign is taking place in. Around social media, we put in some advice around using social media. Very, very limited content there, but we have included links to where people can find out more information about how to use social media when campaigning in general. And the last section was around follow-up and evaluation, and making the point that probably an advocacy campaign is never finished. And it's important that you go back and look at where you're at. Have you achieved your goal? If you haven't achieved your goal, go back and understand why. And collect data along the way to show your successes, because that in itself can be used in follow-up campaigns to ensure that you continue to increase the amount of patients that have access to PCR testing. So that's the advocacy section. In the next, for the following 2 pages are additional resources with resources on advocacy that we found that we thought were particularly good. And you can see there's social media guidelines, there's further information on how to do a stakeholder analysis, and further information on MyPCR and resources relating to MyPCR. And the last page is just a listing of references, because of course this is an evidence-based document. And there's a lot of talk at the moment that advocacy should be evidence-based, and that advocates can't just go out and say we want something because we want it. That advocates have to go out and use evidence to advocate for whatever it is they're trying to advocate for. So we thought it was really important to include a listing of references. Of course, it's not complete, but some of the most important references are in there. So that is the toolkit. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask questions about the toolkit, provide feedback on the toolkit. Do you think that this is useful? Is it what you were expecting? Would anybody like to share their perspective?
And if anyone has a comment, you can just remember to unmute yourself as well. Yeah, Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, great. So thank you for the presentation and for putting this together. I have to be honest to say it's brilliant. I think, however, to test it in practice would be best. So to take it to the patient group and work with them through that, and to see where the questions come out as we prepare for a campaign or start in the process. So on paper, it's pretty straightforward and easy to understand. I think questions might become evident once we start working on it actually.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's a really nice comment, Kathy. I was at the Rising Sun meeting this year, or last December, and we gave everybody in the audience the opportunity to talk about the challenges they faced in their country. And there's such enormous differences between the different countries represented in the Asia Pacific region that it's really difficult to understand where we could provide more guidance. But it would be nice perhaps to build up case studies to show when addressing different challenges what could have worked or what didn't work. And that could be something like you could have a wiki page in MyPCR campaign that people can continue to contribute and build a comprehensive picture of the experiences with the MyPCR campaigns, which could provide an additional resource for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that I think your point is well taken, and the idea of having some kind of central area for collecting feedback from advocates would be great, like a wiki page or something along those lines. Ideally, at the end of this year, after advocates have some time to kind of play with the toolkit, look through it, perhaps implement it in their local communities, then we can have a follow-up webinar where we can also just verbally share our experiences with using the toolkit and kind of collect that feedback and use it as guidelines for the next iteration of the toolkit.
Any other comments or questions?
So if there aren't any other comments or questions at this moment, I'm just going to continue with the presentation by speaking a little bit to the opportunities that are currently available through the MyPCR initiative to utilize the toolkit for advocacy purposes. And there'll be more time at the end, of course, if more questions or thoughts arise, we can continue to discuss that after I just address these grant opportunities. So each year MyPCR provides between 2 and 3 grant opportunities to CML patient advocates. And in 2017, we are offering 2 primary grant opportunities, and these grant opportunities are both rolling, meaning that they're open for the entire year until the end of 2017, the end of December. and they are awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. So we have a limited number of grants that are available. We have 15 MyPCR Advocacy Grants and 10 Hematology Society Grants. So speaking first to the MyPCR Advocacy Grants, these grants were developed with the goal of providing advocates with an outlet or an opportunity to help fund advocacy activities that they would like to conduct in their local communities around access to PCR. And so the idea with this grant is that it would provide some seed money or some initial money for initiatives that that advocates are conducting that might involve the use of the toolkit. The use of the toolkit, of course, is not required, but ideally we would encourage advocates to try to implement it, to use it as a resource, and then through that process provide feedback of how we could continue to strengthen and build out that toolkit. And so for partner organizations who are registered, who have a bank account that can receive international funds, patients can, or advocates can apply for up to $1,000 for this grant. And then for non-registered groups, patient organizations can apply for up to $500 US. And these grant opportunities are available, of course, on the MyPCR website. And then moving on to Hematology Society Grants, and this is a grant that we've been offering for the last 2 years, and so this will be the 3rd year that we're offering this grant opportunity. And it provides the opportunity for registered groups to apply for $2,000 to go towards them hosting a booth, a MyPCR initiative booth at a local or regional Hematology Society conference. And so it's intended to help contribute to whatever costs are incurred by hosting a booth. And of course, we would encourage the patient organizations to also use that as an opportunity to bring their own materials about their organization to share with physicians and attendees at those conferences. And again, if you are a non-registered group, you may receive up to $500, but if you have a bank account that can receive international funds, then you can receive up to $2,000. And so those are the 2 primary grant opportunities that are rolling, that are ongoing, and available to partners of MyPCR in 2017. And then the 3rd grant opportunity that's available again this year, and we've done this, we did this last year as well, is the MyPCR World CML Day Grant. A core goal of the MyPCR initiative is to continue to encourage dialogue between patients and their physicians around diagnostics and PCR testing. And so with World CML Day being on 9/22, we have a grant opportunity for organizations to apply for a $300 grant to cover the cost of them bringing a treat or some kind of gift to a key stakeholder in their community. And so you might remember that last year we conducted this grant opportunity as well, but it was specific to physicians. So it was a Treat Your Physician World CML Day grant. And this year we're kind of expanding those guidelines to treat any stakeholder in your community, because we realize that physicians, while it's important to engage them in conversation around PCR, there may be other stakeholders in your community that would be also equally, if not more important, to engage around just educating about the importance of PCR in the management and the diagnosis of CML. And so this is a little bit of a different grant opportunity in that it's actually a little bit more of a reimbursement than a preemptive grant. And so the way that it works is that the patient organization, if you were wanting to participate in this opportunity, you would identify the treat or the gift that you want to bring to your stakeholder, and you would visit them on 9/22. You would take photos of your activity, and then there is a grant form on the MyPCR website that you would fill out and send into news@themaxfoundation.org or your regional Max Foundation representative, and then your organization would receive $300 retroactively to reimburse you for the expenses of that initiative. And so this is something that is just specific to September. And again, if you want to read more about these 3 opportunities or find the specific directions for how to apply for each grant, I would encourage you to visit mypcr.org/partners. And then finally, I just wanted to mention the PCR Gap Analysis. Some of you may have heard of this. Some of you may not have heard of it. It's a project that's currently being conducted between the Max Foundation and the University of Washington. And essentially it's in response to what Kathy had mentioned or talked about a little bit regarding the type of content that advocates were looking for in this toolkit. And so there was a clear need at CML Horizons during the brainstorming session for some kind of mapping of where PCR is currently available globally and where it's not, and where there are gaps, how much would it cost to fill those gaps, and what is the financial and the economic barrier to bringing access to these parts of the world that don't have any kind of access to PCR. And so what we're doing through the PCR Gap Analysis is we're working with health economists from the University of Washington to essentially do just that, to map the landscape of PCR, to understand where no PCR is available, where insufficient access to PCR is occurring, as well as understanding where PCR access is effective. And so through that, we're then looking at, okay, well, how much would it cost to fill those gaps? And so it's both a kind of global mapping of access and then also an economic mapping of the gaps to PCR. And I think that once this is completed this year, it will be a really powerful tool for advocates to use as they talk to their ministries of health, as they talk to key stakeholders in their communities about both the importance of PCR, the need for PCR, and then providing some concrete data on what it would take to fill the current gaps to access for PCR in their communities. And so if you have any questions or thoughts about the opportunities that are currently available through MyPCR, or if you have requests or suggestions for future resources and opportunities that you would like to see provided through MyPCR, I would love to hear that at this time.
So does anybody have any suggestions on how the Max Foundation could support groups more locally?
It's a bit of a quiet crew.
Lindsay, are you taking the toolkit to CML Horizons? Will you have an opportunity to raise awareness about it there?
I will be bringing some copies, some hard copies of the toolkit to CML Horizons, and I'm also working on putting together a poster just summarizing the toolkit that will be posted up at CML Horizons. So if anyone is attending CML Horizons who would like to talk to me more about it or has feedback for me specifically at the conference, I would love to talk to you about that in May in Frankfurt.
And picking up on Kathy's point, maybe in the future what would be useful is to ask CML Horizons to make a session to allow people to present the experiences on using, on doing a MyPCR campaign.
Absolutely.
And perhaps too also with the rising sun that could happen too.
Yeah.
Because not everybody gets to CML Horizons.
Yeah. It's Kathy again. I think as well for CML Live Africa, our regional group, this will be the first time we really bring an advocacy toolkit, which is different than from just presenting information. So from our region as well, we'll compile case studies and then we can see how it works and does it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Kathy. I remember you, and when I met you last year in Frankfurt, you had some very there are differences. There are very clear differences in the challenges faced in Africa, but there are also opportunities that are different. And it would be really great at a regional level for you to build on that, build up a picture of actions that maybe work better in your region than in other regions.
Definitely. I think it applies to all regions, as you've mentioned earlier.
Mm. So it seems, and Lindsay, the issue is that the toolkit as itself in itself is good, but there is a need now to build up a picture, a comprehensive picture of the experiences in advocacy, so people can learn from each other.
Absolutely, and I think one other good way to gather that information is through the feedback forms that are provided from the patient organizations who receive the advocacy grants through the MyPCR initiative. So we have a feedback form for that specific grant type that offers a space to provide thoughts and recommendations from the organizations that conducted the advocacy initiative in their community. And so hopefully through that, I would encourage the groups to be as honest and open with their feedback as possible, so that we can incorporate that into future iterations of the toolkit as well. Okay, well, I think that wraps up our session. And for those of you who are listening to the recorded version of this conversation, as I mentioned before, if you have questions or suggestions or thoughts that you would like to share, please email me. My email address is eschneider@themaxfoundation.org, and you can see that at the bottom of your screen there. Feel free to send me an email anytime with your thoughts and suggestions. Kathy, anything more from you?
I just want to thank you, because you have been the person behind this project, but also to acknowledge the fact that it was really great to be involved in this project myself, mostly because it really was an advocacy effort. There is so much input from so many different advocates in terms of developing the content, and the steering committee played a very important role, and I just wanted to thank them as well. They're not on the call with us here today, but perhaps we can communicate that through to them. They will be happy to know that overall the toolkit has been well received.
Absolutely, no question. And thank you for your strategic guidance and thought throughout the process. It's been a pleasure to work with the steering committee and you as well. So I appreciate all the hard work and the brainstorming, and I hope that we can continue to develop this resource as we move forward.
Indeed. And I will be at CML Horizons on the Sunday, so I may get to meet some of you there. I fly in on Sunday afternoon because I will moderate the CML CAB meetings.
Excellent. All right, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to talk to you soon by email or at CML Horizons in Frankfurt.
Thank you.